Hey guys, it's the Ace, and welcome to a new little series I'm going to call Random Things, where I discuss random things as they come to me. Now, this is more kind of like a pseudo rant, maybe praise type things of things I like and don't like. So today's random thing I want to talk about is, what is the worst test I've ever took? Now, I said before, I did graduate college recently. And in college, I took a lot of tests. So, what was the worst test I ever took? Well, I'll say this. It wasn't from college, weirdly enough. Instead, it was actually from high school. And it's a particular test that pretty much a lot of people take, especially if they ever want to go to college. That is right. I am talking about the ACT and SAT. But mostly the ACT. Why is the ACT the worst test I ever took? I can break it down into a couple pieces. One, it's mainly false advertising. Now, a lot of these, the ACT and SAT are equally guilty in. Now, there's a couple parts where it's predominantly an ACT issue than an SAT issue. Out of the two, I enjoyed the SAT a bit more. But the first issue is mainly an issue I have with the ACT and SAT altogether. And that is kind of the false advertising nature of it. Okay, so why do I say this test is false advertising? One, we need to discuss types of tests. Now, with tests, there is two main categories of tests. And when I say test, I'm talking about like paper and pencil, examinations. That's what I mean by tests. There's two types, an aptitude and a knowledge test. The one that pretty much everyone knows about or thinks of a test is a knowledge test. Say you're in a history course. A teacher or professor teaches a certain amount of material, and then they give you a test over that material. They spend a month teaching about, the 13 colonies, and then they give you a test on the 13 colonies. That is a textbook definition of a knowledge test. It just examines how much knowledge you learned from a certain event or class. However, an aptitude test is a little bit different. Instead of measuring knowledge and stuff that you know, it instead measures innate ability. So it measures how well you will do on a thing. Now, the main difference between these two tests is a knowledge test is way more fluid than an aptitude test. By that, I mean you can study and prepare for a knowledge test and get a higher score compared to if you didn't. Take one student who doesn't study and they get a C on the test versus one student who studied every weekend. He studied, then he gets an A on the test. The fact that you can study and get a higher score proves this is a knowledge test. However, if it was an aptitude test, the more times you take it, it should stay roughly consistent. It shouldn't be able to change on a whim. Now, what does this have to do with the ACT and SAT? Well, the mere fact you could take the ACT and SAT multiple times, and each time, almost always, you can get a higher score, shows this isn't an aptitude test. Because remember, an aptitude test, you need to get the same score every time. You might see a little variation. You'll always see the same score, unless something catastrophic happens and the person completely changes and all that. Most people never change, and their innate abilities don't really change. So you should see a roughly consistent score throughout all the aptitude tests. If the ACT or SAT was an aptitude test, you see roughly the same scores. But it wasn't. You can take it multiple times. For example, I took the ACT twice. First time I got a 22, and the second time I got a 25. Now, I'll put a pin in those two numbers. It comes relevant to my last point later. But the mere fact that I can score a much higher score the second time, taking it compared to the first time, kind of shows, is this a knowledge test or is it an aptitude? Because you can get two completely different scores just by taking it an extra time. If it wasn't, I should have gotten roughly the same score, but I did it. So that kind of shows you that it actually really isn't measuring innate ability. It's more measuring general knowledge. So it's not actually, it's not actually a scholastic aptitude test. It's more of a scholastic knowledge test. So it should be SKT or SKEET, which, you know what? No, don't fucking call it that. Call it something fucking different. Okay, for the next 2 points, this is more specifically on the ACT, because this is a problem the SAT doesn't really have. But the ACT does have these glaring flaws. One, the timing on the ACT does not make sense. Or it is way too fast-paced for me specifically. Now, as I stated in a previous honeypot video, I actually was diagnosed with ADHD. I was actually recently diagnosed with ADHD, and I have severe inattentiveness. So, that's fun. But I should just come clean now and say it. But that was back in 2020 to 2021. But in high school, I wasn't, so I was put with the regular kids, and we were given the regular timescales. So I think it's way too short, especially on the reading and the science portion. Now, for the first 2 sections, which were English and math, I think the timing is completely fair on those. It gives you about a minute per question on math, and then the writing, it's not super involved. You have to fix grammatical sentences, find the error, or pick which word would be the correct spelling and or grammatical tense. So it's not super involved. And they don't give you a lot of time, but they do give you a little bit to think, which I think is fine. What isn't fine, though, is the reading and the science portion. They give you 40 questions, and they only give you 35 minutes to read it. And a lot of times, the reading sections aren't entirely short. So you have to quickly read through these stuff. And if you have ADHD or dyslexia, that could be an absolute fucking trial, just to try to sit down and read it. But then you have to quickly answer the questions. And sometimes you need to refer back to the passage to understand what the fuck you just read. Now, I know this is more of a personal problem, but that really, really impacted me. This getting so angry at how short of the time that you have. And I'm still to this day a really poor reader. I mean, I could read, but my reading comprehension is just fucking terrible. And try as I might, I still can't get it. I know people are like, oh, why don't you just read more? Problem is, I don't have the focus to do that. I get bored after about 10 minutes and throw the book aside to do something different. So, yeah, that's more of a personal problem, but still, it was very impactful on me. The next argument is the science section is total horseshit. It is not even science half the time. It's fucking data extrapolation, which, yes, happens in science. I know. I have a fucking degree in biology. However, when you expect a science portion, you don't expect fucking general math. Why do I say that? Because I learned more about data extrapolation and reading from math courses than I did in science courses. Because you want to know why? Because they actually taught us science in the science courses. For example, in 10th grade, I had biology. We learned about cells, diffusion, photosynthesis, types of ecosystems, organisms, all that. We learned in 10th grade. We did some data extrapolation, don't get me wrong, and how to read it and stuff, but that wasn't the focus of the fucking course. But why is that the focus on the fucking test? Why is being able to read a fucking chart in a graph science, but yet you don't have any questions about the human body or elements or atoms or fucking anything science related? Oh, they put the data points in a science background, so I guess there you go. Fucking congratulations. Good job, you did it. You did it. Great. Still, that part really pissed me off because I wanted to go to school and get a degree in biology. When I took the science portion, I was actually kind of excited going, ooh, I know a lot about science. And then I saw it was this. I'm like, wow, this is an insult. This isn't science at all. Or this barely resembles science. This is more of like statistics course. And yes, I took a statistics course in college, and I'll say the SAT science section was better at being a statistics test than a science test. So take that for what you will. So regardless, the last point I have to say, now this kind of ties in, it doesn't really matter if it's the ACT or SAT. The point that I really, really hate about it is how much importance is tied to such an arbitrary test. Because people have bought into the idea that, oh, this is important. This will describe how you will do in college. And everything is now trying to be based around one thing. That really angers me, and it's a load of bullshit. Honestly, it's total bullshit. And this is where my more personal experience comes in, because remember when I said I got those 2 tests? Well, one thing about me is I was in the honors level classes when I was in high school. I've been in honors since like about 7th grade or so. About halfway into 7th grade, I switched to honors. When I took the test in high school, I got a 22. Which, you know, isn't a terrible score, especially comparative to everyone else in regular classes. But I probably had the lowest score comparative to everybody in honors. Yeah, meanwhile, I'm sitting here with a nice 22. They're sitting up there with probably a 32. Now, we did have one person take the test multiple times and managed to get a perfect score on it. Thus, giving more credence to say, oh, wait, this isn't an aptitude test? The fact that you can, A, get a perfect score, and B, take it repeatedly and get a perfect score on it just adds more fuel to the fact that they're lying about what their tests do. And second, I was, criticized by the other fucking nerds for not scoring a high class. And you're like, oh, who gives a shit? They're nerds. Well, the thing is, I have most of my fucking classes I took with these students. And yes, it doesn't really matter how intelligent or how dumb you are, people can still be assholes. Or they treated me different because, oh, look at this dumb fuck, you can't even take a test, which was later credited to my ADHD, but still, that was kind of infuriating. And it made me angry at myself because because I didn't know I had an issue with me at the time, I had to be lower than these people. Like, I wasn't good enough to be with these people, which, was a bit demoralizing. Also, around the same time, I started becoming more aloof and just stopped caring what people thought. But I always still have that thing going, like, what if I'm in the wrong place? Because these people are scoring high 30s and I barely cracked 20. So, great. There's an entire stigma of getting a low score or getting a score that is not with the rest of your class or with your stream. I mean, I guess you can think of someone who gets a really high score in the ACT when everyone else doesn't. You could feel a little isolated and feel different. Or, like in some major cities, a lot of people are pressured out of taking high-level courses because they're not with their classmates or their neighbors, and then they all start treating them thinking that they're better than them. Now, for me, I had the opposite, where I didn't score high enough, and everyone thought they were better than me, and then I started thinking they were better than me, when in reality, I knew I was better than most of them, because I was really, really intelligent. I just could not express it through testing. And this is a consistent problem with me, is just I was just horrible at tests. I still kind of am when it comes to it. I just sit here and describe you the entire process of how the mitochondria makes ATP and how a chloroplast makes sugar and other starches and stuff. I can describe that to you perfectly, but if you asked me to sit down and take a test, I would probably struggle because I just can't really take tests very well. And the ACT and SAT both reeled its head and just proved that I was horrible at tests, and people criticized me for that, where they judged me for being a terrible test taker. But it's not my fault entirely, and this is an entire issue on standardized testing, is that people with bad testing anxiety or who just suck at taking tests are going to be perceived as worse, or they need special needs. And being special needs, I never was, but there's an entire stigma behind that. If you're in the special needs program, they treat you like subhuman sometimes, but I'm not going to describe that more. You can have other people talk about being in special needs and stuff like that. That there's an entire stigma behind that. But the thing is, people rely so heavily on these tests that show that this is who you are, when in fact it isn't. It's just a stupid knowledge test that measures your ability to read a fucking table repeatedly. If you haven't gotten to that level yet, or you just haven't took the amount of course material for it, especially on the math portion where, oh, you haven't learned how to do a bunch of factoring or haven't learned how to do this specific formula, oh, good job. Now you don't know how to do math. The problem is, in total, it just makes broad generalizations that especially can be very negative, or it can give people false confidence in that point. So to sum up this section, the problem is these tests can give people anxiety, or they can make people feel or think worse of themselves, but it could also have the opposite effect where these people do so well, but they're just really good at taking tests. They might not know half the shit, or it just gives them a lot of confidence and arrogance that, oh, I can do this easily. And they're taken more seriously than the person that struggles with tests and, oh, good job. You're now special needs. In conclusion, why do I think the ACT specific was the worst test? Well, 1, it's false advertising. 2, the timings make 0 sense. 3, the science section is total bullshit. And 4, the amount of pressure and social stigma and everything that is on a fucking knowledge test that just doesn't describe who you are. That is why I think the ACT is the worst test that I personally have ever took. And I think I ever will take. Because if I ever go back to school and possibly become a nurse, which is what I'm debating on doing right now, if I have to take more tests, so be it. But at least then the tests are specific to me being a nurse compared to not. So anyways, guys, that'll about do it for this video. I hope you enjoyed these little weird videos where I just discuss random things, but this just popped in my head. But this just popped in my head, and I figured, hey, this would be not a bad idea to discuss or just come up with a little series. So I hope you guys did enjoy, and I hope you guys have a good day. See you in the next video, guys. See ya.